Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to be walking through installing an image over the network to a machine from our WDS server. In my last video, we went and created this install image for Windows Server 2012 R2 Standard. And we tested just to make sure that WDS actually saw the image and could install it. In this video, I actually want to go through the process of initiating the install. Since this will be fairly time-consuming, periodically I will pause my recording and just let it process the image and install the operating system. That way this doesn't drag on for the entire duration. The beginning steps are very similar to my last couple of videos. Using F12 to get into the network boot option, and depending on how your WDS server is configured, hitting F12 again to continue the network boot. Let me scroll down a little bit here, and we can see that it's pulling that boot.wim, the 64-bit version, so that it can install our install image. And then once this finishes, it'll begin that setup process that we've seen once or twice now. We'll select the locale and keyboard setup, and then it will show us the image. And all we need to do is select that image, and it'll begin installing it. In the last video, I showed how to create that install image. It's literally the most basic version. It's the equivalent of the installation CD. There's nothing extra. There's no bells and whistles. It's the stock operating system from Microsoft. As I mentioned in my last video, I'm hoping to create a video using some of the DISM utility commands to add some patches or add some updates. We'll see how this video goes, and hopefully I'll be able to get to that sometime in the near future. Alright, so we have our WDS is configured correctly. We verified that, so we're going to go ahead and continue this process. There's our standard version of our server, so we'll select that. And so all of this process can actually be done with an unattend file or an answer file. I'm going to go ahead and select drive options. We're going to create new, and it'll create that little sub-partition, kind of. And there it is, system reserved. We're going to install it to the remainder of the free space. If you're reusing a drive, I would recommend formatting it before you do anything. I would actually delete both of these, format the full drive, then set up the partitions for the system reserve partition and the actual OS partition. Since this is a virtual, I'm not going to worry about it, but in a live environment, I would recommend it. So we walked through the wizard there, and that literally was pretty much the whole process of getting it started. So it's communicating with the server now and beginning to download from the server that install image, which is going to give it all of the data it needs to install the Windows Server 2012 R2 operating system. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and pause. I'll try to come back as this finishes. Alright, so we see that it is kind of completing the total installation process. It installed the basic features. It's going to do a reboot, and it'll install, on a physical machine, it'll install any drivers that were necessary, which is why it's crucial that you have driver packages set up on your WDS server. Let's go ahead and see if we can't speed that up just a little bit. So once the reboot completes, it'll kind of continue the install and setup process. At this point, it has the operating system written to the hard drive. So it's no longer pulling the OS or the install image from the server. It has that information. The only thing it'll need to be pulling from the server would be those drivers from whatever driver package you have enabled that match its hardware. And it should show us that here momentarily. I've noticed a lot of times on physical machines at least, I'm not sure if it'll do it here on a virtual, but on physical machines it'll go and download and install the appropriate drivers, and it'll do another reboot before it comes back and begins prompting again for the language, time zone, and computer name. The advantage of using a virtual is this is going quite a bit faster than it would on a physical machine. I didn't time it exactly. Granted, this is only one instance of this image being pulled across the network, so I think it took about 15 minutes to get to this point. If you're in a larger environment, when you're doing 20, 30, 40 machines all at once, you would want to set up a multicast for those larger deployments. That way the multicast is still only transmitting the install image data once to all the machines at once, rather than having 40 different data streams for the same image. In any case, there's a fairly large number of variables as far as what will affect your total speeds for this whole process. The hardware from your server, how quickly it can interface with the network, the hardware with your machines that are pulling the image or that are receiving the image, as well as any routing that needs to happen between the two, the number of switches, or hopefully not hubs between them, as well as any additional protocols on your switches or routers between your server and your machines that are receiving the image. So there's quite a few things that you'd have to look into if you're receiving the image slowly. You're getting a poor performance in the transmission. Fortunately for me here, in this test environment, everything being done virtually, it is somewhat faster in that it's reading and writing all to the same hard drive. So it's all kind of happening here on one machine, which makes it a little bit faster, so it's not having to transfer across an entire network. The downside to that is it's having to read and write the same hard drive kind of simultaneously. And so here we see, just like we would with the installation media, the basic setups. And again, your unattend file, your answer file, can manage all of this for you if you have it set up properly. Your unattend file can also come in and create your user accounts automatically for you with the appropriate level of authorization, whether an admin account or just a local user account. Chances are, though, if you're doing this process with WDS, you're probably using Active Directory, so you have a full domain, and you don't need to set up local users, because most likely you're using domain users for all of the staff in your environment. There are, of course, a few exceptions. Those would be kind of on a case-by-case basis. And then once this completes, it may do one final reboot. It may let us just go ahead and log directly into it. Eventually. So this step's taking a little bit longer than I expected. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording. We'll come back as this finishes, hopefully. Alright, now that setup process has completed, it did not reboot, so it'll allow us just to go ahead and log directly in. It did, because of the settings on the WDS server, it automatically joined this machine to the domain. So let's go ahead and get signed in as the domain administrator. And it'll load the profile or create the profile and set up the desktop settings and everything. If you have your group policies already kind of configured, it may be picking up on the group policies as you log in, so it'll try to apply those before it completes the login. You'll probably notice your first time logging into any machine is going to take a little bit longer than normal as it applies those policies for the first time. In this test environment, I don't have any policies created to configure anything. It's all just the default domain policies, so it's fairly quick. And then there are a few things that you would likely want to do once you have the server OS installed. You'll want to go and make sure that your time zone is set up correctly, that its IP addressing is set up correctly. You'd also want to double check the machine name. I've actually found a pretty decent website, and I'll try to include this link down in the description. It covers the first 10 steps in general that you would want to look over. So the first thing it mentions is renaming the server. Depending on your network environment, you may have naming conventions. So you want to verify your name, join it to the domain if it didn't automatically. If you don't have it set up to automatically join, or if you don't have that scripted, you probably want to get it onto a domain. Disabling the firewall, I'm not sure I would agree with that, at least not all the time. If you have an external firewall, then you might want to do that. If you don't have an external firewall and you have nothing else, I would leave the firewall enabled and set up exceptions for whatever processes you need, rather than disabling the entire firewall. Just open up the ports that you need for your services or roles or whatever the case may be. Remote desktop, again, that's entirely dependent upon your network. If that's how you want to manage it, then that's fine. If you have like a VPN or something else, any kind of software that will allow you to remote in to control it, then you might want to look a little bit closer at whether or not you want to really enable remote desktop connections. Unfortunately, you can limit who's allowed to remotely log into that, so again, it's pretty network dependent, kind of depending on how you want to set it up. Windows updates, you probably will want to update this server at least occasionally. I generally wouldn't recommend having it do everything automatically, especially if it requires any reboots. Set it up manually. Do your installs on downtime when nobody's going to be using any of the resources on that server. So if you have a DHCP server and it's busy rebooting for updates while somebody's trying to get a DHCP address, obviously that's going to cause some problems on your network. Same thing with file sharing servers. If somebody's using a file from that server and that server suddenly reboots, it can cause all sorts of headaches. So if you are going to configure this, I would recommend either configure it for a time you know nobody is going to be using any of the resources, like Saturday at 2 a.m. or Sunday at 1 a.m., something like that, or set it up so that you manually can manage when it will update and reboot. Internet Explorer Enhanced Security Configuration, that's pretty much up to you. I will add a side note to that, is even if you do disable that, a lot of the time you will still need to go in and enable downloads. So keep that in mind. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to disable this, but you want to make sure that you also have enabled downloads if that's the kind of thing you're going to be doing. If you need to download driver packages and stuff like that, then you'll need to do both of those. There's the time zone settings, so you want to make sure those are all accurate. Anti-malware or antivirus. Number 10 here, make sure the server's enlightened if it's a virtual machine. A lot of the times it'll come with kind of some of the basic virtual support software already installed. If not, your virtualization software will likely include some kind of tool to help install those to your virtual machines. So that's most of the basics. And so we see that it picked up a generic name. So again, that is something you're going to want to verify based on your naming conventions. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them for me below. I'll try to reply in a timely fashion. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.